There are times, not often in human history, when the urge to build conspires with a vision of beauty. When the will to achieve conspires with the skill to create. What is born is that rare thing, a work of wonder. A work that gives pause, that catches the breath, that seems to cry out, behold what we can accomplish. These are the enduring works of man's own creation, lasting testaments of an eternal struggle to leave a mark on a fleeting world. Nearly 2,000 years ago, the citizens of Rome witnessed a marvel. Here on the site where Emperor Nero had built a lavish palace with an artificial lake, a new emperor, Vespasian, sought to leave his mark. Not with a grand villa for his own pleasure, nor with a temple to appease the gods, but with an immense palace for the public, an amphitheater to house the games, contests, and rituals that had become the most important public assemblies in the capital. Vespasian knew the value of public relations. When he came to power in the year 69 AD, he inherited a city in shambles. A great fire had destroyed much of Rome 4 years earlier. The corrupt Nero, among others, had recklessly exhausted the treasury, and the Roman Senate was split into hostile camps after 2 years of civil war. Vespasian soon announced a new plan. He would drain Nero's artificial lake and build an enormous public amphitheater, the largest ever attempted. He dubbed it the Flavian Amphitheater, after his own family name. Later generations came to call it the Colosseum, reflecting its colossal proportions. In its sheer size and engineering, it was the most ambitious building ever attempted in the ancient world. Huge limestone blocks were hauled by slaves to build an ellipse of monumental dimensions, 1/3 of a mile in circumference, covering 6 acres and rising 16 stories high. Arches and piers were built first, and then lateral walls were filled in with lighter volcanic rock called pumice. With room for some 50,000 spectators, the Colosseum is practically the size of the Houston Astrodome. Today's stadium builders still rely on the ingenious system of entrances and passageways first attempted here. "80 arches run along the ground level, forming 76 numbered entrances. Patrons held tickets stamped with their entrance number and could find their seats so efficiently that the entire structure could be filled in less than 10 minutes. Once inside, the place of honor was a marble grandstand where the emperor sat with his entourage, including Vestal virgins. Above sat private citizens. Higher still sat foreign visitors and slaves. And finally, on wooden bleachers, women and the poor. Even in the public games, class and status were the organizing principles. But why such an impressive building for sports? In early Roman times, public games, called circuses, were held only on sacred days to appease the gods of the city. But by the time of Jesus, tournaments, wild beast hunts, and chariot races had become an obsession with Romans. Any emperor worth his salt had listened to the historian Juvenal's admonition.
Only two things does a Roman citizen worry about these days: panem et circenses, bread and the big match.
Vespasian's showpiece would take less than 10 years to complete. And though he would not live to see the finished work, it remains the enduring symbol of an entire civilization. Romans had already proved to be the finest engineers the world had seen, perfecters of the arch, the dome, builders of roads, aqueducts, bridges, and baths. While Roman aesthetics were borrowed wholesale from the Greeks, their technology was profoundly original. Nearby in the Pantheon, a massive concrete dome seems to float effortlessly in space. So large a ring of cast concrete, pierced by a single shaft of light, would not be attempted again until the 20th century. Yet it is the Colosseum that has proved to be Rome's greatest architectural legacy, even though what went on inside was as grisly as the building was magnificent. Spectators surrounded a central arena where sand was spread to soak up the blood that was spilled in the ritual games. On the inaugural day in the year 80, the new Emperor Titus, Vespasian's son, opened the amphitheater with a ghoulish wild beast hunt. In one day, some 5,000 animals were put to death. The gory rites of celebration could last more than 3 months. Exotic beasts from the far reaches of the empire were kept below floor level in cells still visible today. The animals were then lifted directly to the arena level on elevators, where they met the spears of the hunters. At times, the arena was deliberately flooded by shutting off the drainage gutters. The stadium became a small sea for the staging of mock naval battles. But the gladiators were the highlight in the Colosseum. Slaves, criminals, and the lowest ranks of Roman men, and even some women who had been specially trained, then turned out for a public battle.
Hail Caesar! We who are about to die salute you!
The bravery or cowardice of the gladiator was cheered or jeered by the crowd, who voted with their hands on the fate of the vanquished. According to some historians, thumbs up or a wave of the handkerchief meant that the gladiator lived, or even became a free man. Thumbs down, and the defeated warrior met a swift death. For 325 years, the Colosseum witnessed ever more gruesome displays, and may even have been the site for the martyrdom of persecuted Christians. Finally, in 404 AD, all public sacrifices in Rome were banned by the Christian emperors in power, and the Colosseum, damaged by earthquakes and lightning, fell into ruin. Over the centuries, the Colosseum became a marble quarry, looted by the would-be Caesars of each new age. But the triumph of its engineering has kept it standing, a haunting symbol of the Roman Empire at its most exalted and its most depraved. Centuries after its completion, an English monk, the Venerable Bede, would prophesy,
"While stands the Colosseum, Rome shall stand. When falls the Colosseum, Rome shall fall. And when Rome falls, the world."
Perched high in the thin air of the Andes, 7,000 feet above the ocean, a mystery lay shrouded in the cloud forests for 4 centuries. 16th century chronicles told that these impenetrable mountains hid the last great city of the Incas, Vilcabamba, the city where Manco Inca, the leader of the Children of the Sun, desperately sought refuge from the Spanish, who had decimated his empire in their lust for gold. In 1911, a young American historian, Hiram Bingham, set out to chart the unexplored ruins of the Urubamba Valley in Peru. Local Indians guided him to a remote mountaintop, which at first seemed impossibly inhospitable to human habitation. The Indians called it simply the Old Peak, Machu Picchu. Bingham described the journey.
On all fours, we pulled ourselves up through slippery grass. Far below, the Urubamba snarled angrily. We rounded a knoll and suddenly faced tier upon tier of Inca terraces. What settlement had needed 100 such terraces? Enough food could be grown here to feed a city. This beautifully preserved sanctuary had obviously never felt the tramp of a conquistador's boot. I realized that Machu Picchu might prove to be the largest and most important ruin discovered in South America since the Spaniards arrived.
What Bingham had come across, though choked by jungle growth, was extraordinary. A plateau stretching 2 square miles, with more than 200 buildings of unsurpassed stonemasonry.
Dimly, I began to realize that this wall, with its adjoining semicircular temple over the cave, was as fine as the finest stonework in the world. It fairly took my breath away. What could this place be?
Bingham came to believe that he had found the lost city of Vilcabamba, sanctuary of Manco Inca. But Machu Picchu eludes most explanations, for it is not a city at all, but rather an immense religious center, a sacred place for the rituals of one of the world's most enigmatic civilizations. The Incas built an empire that at its height in the 16th century extended some 2,500 miles, the most powerful in South America. The Inca capital, Cusco, swarmed with 100,000 people, and their wealth was legendary. This courtyard at Coricancha, the Temple of the Sun in Cusco, was once plated with 700 solid gold sheets, each weighing more than 4 pounds. Like most of the Incas' treasures, it was looted by Spanish conquerors. The Incas were ingenious social organizers. Despite having no written language, they developed a sophisticated economy, hewing terraces into the steep terrain, irrigating them with canals, cultivating corn and potatoes, domesticating alpacas and llamas. Today, many of Peru's Indians conduct their lives on the foundations of their Inca ancestors. And speak the language, Quechua, once spoken in the temples of Machu Picchu. But the most enduring Inca achievement is also their most baffling. These monuments in stone. Enormous granite blocks so precisely fitted that not even a penknife can pierce the cracks. The builders hauled the blocks miles from their quarries. and yet no evidence has ever shown that they possessed the wheel, any draft animals, or tools hard enough to hew these perfect blocks. Like their hard-working descendants, teams of Machu Picchu's builders must have dragged each rough-hewn stone at an agonizing pace, lugging it along the ground with fiber ropes. Sometimes the stones were so heavy they were abandoned in a field. But the men were not punished. Rather, the Incas preferred to blame the rocks, calling them secusca, weary stones. Once on the site, the stones were fine cut and laid into place. As many as 40 angles would be carved in one rock face in order to secure a perfect fit or to create a delicate curve in a wall, as in the Temple of the Sun. The trapezoidal shape of most of the buildings was an Inca innovation, lending stability during frequent earthquakes that shook the Andes. Most have survived intact, only their thatched roofs falling prey to 5 centuries of jungle weather. But what went on here to warrant such elaborate construction? Machu Picchu seems to have been a kind of sacred headquarters for the Inca religion, a religion based on worship of the sun and its progress through the heavens. The Intihuatana, or tethering place of the sun. This stone outcropping allowed Incas to predict the solstices and equinoxes, so critical to the planting and reaping of corn. On the June solstice, marking the beginning of winter south of the equator, the sun was symbolically hitched to the land to ensure its return in the coming months. The festival, called Inti Raymi, lasted 9 days and is still observed in the ancient Inca fortress called Sacsayhuaman. To the Incas, the sun was the divine father of all the people, and the king was the sun's regent on earth. Gold symbolized the tears of the sun, and corn was the sun's golden produce. From this very fortress in the year 1536, the besieged leader, Manco Inca, fled to the hills forever. Only 4 years earlier, Francisco Pizarro had led a tiny band of Spaniards into the heart of the Inca Empire. Spurred by rumors of fabulous wealth and armed with superior weapons, fewer than 200 Spanish managed to conquer an Indian population of several million, kill their emperor Atahualpa, and loot the capital. By July 1533, the Spanish had collected 24 tons of gold and silver. When Manco Inca lost his final battle, he abandoned Cusco. It soon became a colonial town, built on the indestructible foundations of the Inca city. And Manco Inca's last refuge, called Vilcabamba, could it actually have been at Machu Picchu? Evidence seems to point to another site, recently located far to the northwest. Machu Picchu had probably been abandoned long before and had already fallen prey to the encroaching jungle. Like the civilization that built it, Machu Picchu remains a mystery, swallowed by the land from which it sprang. On the other side of the world, a new emperor scratched a man-made line of rock across the face of the earth, as if to say, even to the gods, here is my land, approach at your peril. The Ming Dynasty of China had finally cast off the yoke of Mongol rule, forcing the descendants of Genghis Khan to withdraw to the northern steppes. China, the Middle Kingdom, was again ruled by a Chinese emperor. And to defend the empire, the building of a massive wall was ordered, stretching from the Yalu River on the Bay of Korea to the wilderness of the Gobi Desert. 3,000 miles of brick and stone, 25 feet high, the largest edifice ever built by man, and perhaps the only structure visible from space. If it were laid end to end in the United States, it would link New York and Los Angeles. The Great Wall of China that exists today is the one built during the Ming Dynasty, which started even before the birth of Columbus in the 15th century. But the idea of building a wall around the Middle Kingdom dates back 2,000 years earlier, to the 8th century before Christ. At that time, China was in chaos. Warring states waged battle on one another and fought off nomadic tribes that invaded from the north. Over hundreds of years, a succession of earthen walls had been built, stretching between mountains and along valleys in vain attempts to keep out hostile neighbors. But in the year 221 BC, one man unified China and proclaimed himself her first emperor, Qin Shi Huangdi. In his brief 12-year reign, Qin Shi Huangdi linked together thousands of miles of old walls in a massive military defense against the Huns. A girdle round a nation, this great wall would come to symbolize China forevermore, fiercely protective, hostile to foreigners, prodigious in work, a unified people of the land. Qin Shi Huangdi's wall gave the Chinese a national identity they had never before experienced, and it meant security. The northern frontiers soon attracted settlers and farmers. In its protective shadow, traders ventured along roads leading westward, a journey over what came to be known as the Silk Route, bringing the riches of the Orient to India, Persia, and Rome. The Chinese emperor wrote, "Now the common people are pacified and no longer have any fear of war. Men work on the land, while women likewise are engaged in their work." But that was his version. The wall may have been an astonishing military feat, but it was also a brutal act of forced labor. 800,000 soldiers, captive workers, and prisoners were pressed into service to build the wall. Criminals faced a particularly grim punishment: Their heads were shaved, faces blackened, and with necks clamped into iron collars, they were dispatched to far-flung provinces to haul dirt. One chronicler wrote, "Ditches on the roadside were filled with corpses of men who had been forced into construction of the Great Wall. And when men could no longer be found, their widows joined the march." One widow's story has passed into legend. Here at the eastern edge of the wall near the China Sea, a temple stands in tribute to Meng Jiannu. Meng, the story goes, went in search of her husband who had been forced to construct the wall. When she learned that he lay buried beneath the barricade, her copious tears made the wall collapse. She discovered her husband's bones and cursed the emperor. By denouncing the autocratic ruler, she became the symbolic voice of the common people against an almighty oppressor. Little of Qin Shi Huangti's dirt wall remains today. These stone fortifications are the result of 200 continuous years of restoration and building under the Ming Dynasty. Their work, in turn, is being restored even today. The wall traverses half of China, hugging mountain cliffs and standing guard in valleys, ingeniously turning harsh landscape to tactical advantage. At the strategic garrison town of Sanhaiguan, a circular fortress 2.5 miles around overlooks the ocean like the head of a dragon snaking down to the sea. A moat 25 feet deep protects this gate, called the First Pass under heaven. "1,400 miles away, the Jiayuguan Fortress was the final outpost of the empire as it leaned westward toward the vast Mongol desert. Between these two extremes stood a network of some 25,000 watchtowers, manned by sentries who lived inside the hollow garrisons. When under attack, they would relay information about enemy troop strength by sending up smoke signals by day, fires by night. War intelligence traveled hundreds of miles in a matter of hours. Near Beijing, the all-important fortress of Badalin is built within layer after layer of outer walls, wide enough to accommodate 5 mounted horses or 10 infantrymen marching abreast. Double notches, or crenellations, assure that the wall can be defended no matter which side is attacked. While the wall may have survived the arrows and swords of the Mongols and the Manchus, it barely survived the ideological assaults of our own time. During the Cultural Revolution of the late 1960s, disdain for the past led contemptuous farmers to trundle away whole sections of the wall for use in their pigsties. But today, the Great Wall has been restored, if not always physically, then figuratively, to the signal role it once played in China's national psyche. It again stands as a defining line, an imprint on the land, testament to the endurance of a people and of their ancestors who built it. Thousands of miles to the northwest, another wall defend against the same Mongol invaders. But instead of stretching across the landscape, this wall encircled a small city. It was the citadel of Moscow. The word in Russian is Kremlin. For 8 centuries, Moscow's Kremlin Wall has protected the centerpiece of Russian civilization. Within its 69 acres are the churches, cathedrals, and palaces of the Tsars. It was in the Kremlin that the regimes of Ivan the Terrible and Peter the Great were born, where the Russian Orthodox Church held dominion over the souls of a nation. Here are the splendors and excesses of the Romanovs. Here was the capital of Lenin's revolutionary republic, and here Stalin carried out bloody purges of his own people. From behind these walls, a Cold War was waged, and here a new chapter in Russian history unfolded in the last decade of the 20th century. The entire pageant of the Russian people is embodied in the spires and domes of this compound. It is a monument to their greatest strivings and their greatest failures. The Russian playwright Mayakovsky went even further. The earth, as we all know, begins at the Kremlin. The Kremlin itself had somewhat more modest beginnings. Initially just a triangular wooden fortress protecting Moscow's princely palaces, over centuries the Kremlin expanded to include churches, monasteries, workshops, and houses. But it was Ivan III, known as Ivan the Great, who in the late 15th century envisioned Moscow as a grand imperial capital, rivaling Rome and Constantinople in religious authority. He adopted the double eagle as his emblem and took the title of ruler of all Russia, a role his successors would come to call Tsar, modeling themselves after the Roman Caesars. Ivan expanded the Kremlin, bringing renowned architects from Renaissance Italy to transform the medieval compound. The architects cleared away the old wood and stone battlements to build the red brick walls that survive to this day. Nearly 1.5 miles long, up to 20 feet wide, the walls took 10 years to construct and are among the finest military fortifications ever erected. 20 towers stab the skyline, circling the citadel. One tower contains the Spassky Gate, still considered the Kremlin's majestic main entrance. The story goes that when Napoleon marched triumphant through the Spassky Gate, his 3-cornered hat was knocked off, foreshadowing the deadly defeat his soldiers would soon suffer on the retreat from Moscow. Less than half of his 600,000 troops survived their winter retreat. Hundreds of their cannon, abandoned in the snow, now stare back defiantly along the walls of the building known as the Arsenal. But if the hard skeleton of the Kremlin is her walls and towers, her soul is here in Cathedral Square. Ivan the Great commissioned 3 magnificent cathedrals to form the centerpiece of Russian Orthodoxy. His immense bell tower added a focal point to Cathedral Square, and indeed to the whole city. The Cathedral of the Assumption, designed by Fioravanti of Bologna, sits in simple monumental form beneath 5 golden cupolas. Here the Tsars of Moscow were crowned. Inside, some of Russia's most sacred icons stand watch. The Redeemer of the Wrathful Eyes, carried as a standard into battle. The mystical Madonna of Vladimir, known by Muscovites as the Lady of Tenderness. Next door is the Cathedral of the Annunciation, at one time the private chapel of the Tsars. 9 golden domes and a magnificent altar screen have witnessed the marriages, baptisms, and private agonies of members of the imperial dynasty. Ivan IV, known as Ivan the Terrible, depicted here in a famous Eisenstein film, was barred from worship for offenses against the church. His arbitrary butchery of suspected traitors and wild fits of rage struck terror in his court. He is buried next door, along with most of the Tsars, in the Cathedral of the Archangel. His sarcophagus lies next to that of his son, whom Ivan killed with his own hands. But the legacy of Ivan the Terrible was not exclusively evil. He commissioned the building of St. Basil's Cathedral, just outside the Kremlin wall. 9 fantastic domes, no two alike, rise above Red Square. It was a whim of the erratic Ivan that placed the cathedral in the middle of Moscow's raucous public market, rather than within the solemn citadel. The Kremlin bears witness to the excesses of the Tsars in the staggering wealth of its palaces. While outside the walls, Russian serfs and peasants suffered bitter hardships, the court of the Tsars outbuilt the imperial capitals of Europe. One visitor, upon seeing the Kremlin for the first time, gasped. Horizontally and vertically, towers and domes, spires, cones, onions, crenellations filled the whole view. It might have been the invention of Dante arrived in a Russian heaven. The Palace of Facets, oldest secular building in the Kremlin, houses the Tsar's receiving room, where women, banned from official functions, watch the court intrigues from an arched window. In the Terem Palace were royal apartments where the roofs and gutters were painted and gilded. Here, the young Tsarevich, Peter, the first Romanov, watched his family murdered before his eyes. At only 10 years old, he was forced to share the throne with his half-brother, quite literally a dual throne, while his half-sister Sophia concealed herself and whispered instructions to the young Tsar. It was Peter who, in 1712, put an end to the Kremlin's bloody intrigues by moving the capital to his new northern city, St. Petersburg. But the Kremlin remained a home away from home for the Romanovs. Over the next 2 centuries, the old palaces were linked together into the Grand Kremlin Palace, which became the showpiece of the imperial court. Public reception rooms were built on a vast scale to impress visiting dignitaries. The St. George Hall alone is some 65 yards long. More intimate, though no less opulent, are the palace's private chambers, where the Romanovs indulged their legendary appetite for the decorative arts. Many of the Kremlin's treasures were eventually amassed in the Imperial Museum known as the Armory, where the splendors of the court had been painstakingly restored, even during the era of Soviet domination. But the extravagance of life in the Kremlin could not survive the deep dissatisfaction of a restless underclass. After the revolution of 1917, Vladimir Ilyich Lenin founded a new socialist republic. The following spring, he moved the capital to Moscow. The Kremlin was once again the center of power in Russia. This move ushered in a period of profound growth at the Kremlin. Soviet parliament buildings and Congress halls in the severe realist style stand in marked contrast to their ornate neighbors. Here, too, were the Spartan living quarters of Lenin, who preferred to eat off of chipped plates instead of imperial china. Under the Soviets, the Kremlin was transformed into a different kind of monument, not to courtly wealth, but to the power of the communist state. The Red Star replaced the Tsar's double eagle. Busts of Lenin replaced the icons of saints. And the tomb where Lenin lay embalmed became a site of holy pilgrimage for the faithful. Even today, as Russians repudiate their Soviet past, they do not reject the Kremlin.
It's the history of our state. The Kremlin has always been the country's political, cultural, and spiritual center.
For me, this is sacred. This is the history of our state of Russia, which exists and will exist, whatever commotions may come along and stir it up.
We really love this place, I in particular. I brought my child to show her how truly splendid our homeland is, to tell her about what we see, what we know, what we remember.
The Kremlin continues to capture the hearts of the Russian people, not only for its beauty, but for what it holds in trust, their memories and their hopes. While the Kremlin has survived revolutions, there is a different palace that barely survived one. A palace so majestic, so lavish, so excessively aristocratic, that it bears a double legacy as both the capital of European artistry and the very symbol of royal arrogance. Versailles began as an act of jealousy. Louis XIV, known as the Sun King, had visited the magnificent chateau of one of his ministers. So outraged was the king at the lavish appointments of his subordinate chateau that the king imprisoned him and looted his home. The booty would soon find its place in a new palace that Louis ordered built for himself. He chose a swampy site at Versailles, 11 miles southwest of Paris. As a boy, he had grown fond of his father's hunting lodge here. Versailles would be the new court of France. More than 22,000 laborers were brought in to transform 250 acres of marsh into the most beautiful palace and gardens in the world. Vistas were created where none had existed. Rivers were redirected to pour millions of gallons of water into 400 fountains. When the stench of Versailles' latrines became too strong, Louis had 3,000 fragrant trees in boxes strategically arranged. Some of them survive to this day in l'Orangerie. In fact, Versailles represents the pinnacle of Baroque sensibility. Here, nature was tamed and sometimes tortured into submission. Every twig and branch at Versailles, every natural outcropping was subject to revision. Trees were set back slightly from the long pathways so that they would not cast shadows on the magnificent statues that dot the gardens. Potted plants, some 150,000 of them, were changed as often as 15 times a year so that Versailles was always in flower. The buildings of Versailles also impose a rational, man-made order on a scale of incomprehensible luxury. Louis wanted a palace where he could keep an eye on the intrigues of the court. So Versailles was built to house some 3,000 noblemen, courtiers, ladies-in-waiting, and all of their attendants. 700 rooms were adorned with marble, brocade, velvet, and gold. Versailles became the living quarters and meeting rooms for the French aristocracy. Since Louis loved to live in the public eye, he kept the palace open to all who came to gawk. At the exact architectural center of this gilded beehive was Louis's own bedchamber. The day started here not with sunrise, but with kingrise, a ritual called Lever du Roi. Louis had an attendant for every function, one to don the left sleeve, another the right, one to place the cravat, another to tie it. 4,000 servants and 500 cooks fed the court's ravenous appetite for ceremony. Days at court were spent in an intricate web of receptions, meetings, meals, theatrical performances, plays, gambling, assignations, and elegant balls. The king often participated in the performances of folkloric ballets. It was understood that only the king would join the dancers. The Galerie des Glaces was one of dozens of reception rooms. The hall's 400 mirrors are oriented to set the room ablaze at sunset. Here in the drawing room, adjacent to the Hall of Mirrors, courtiers rose in rank or fell into disfavor according to the changing fashions of the day. The smallest affectation of the king, whether in dress, cuisine, dance, or art, would soon become the rage not only in France, but in all the courts of Europe. And a similar power fell upon the fortunate mistress who had most recently caught the eye of the king. The Marquise de Montespan held sway for quite a while. Since Louis wanted to spend time with her away from the eyes of the court, he built a separate miniature chateau on the grounds of Versailles, Le Grand Trianon. In 1715, Louis was succeeded by his great-grandson, Louis XV, who himself expanded Versailles under the influence of another remarkable woman, Madame du Pompadour, his lover of 20 years. She too wanted a hideaway from the court, and so built Le Petit Trianon. But she did not live to see it completed, and it became the hideaway of the king and his newest favorite, the Comtesse du Barry. But it was another woman of Versailles who would come to epitomize the excesses of the French court, Marie Antoinette. The Austrian-born Marie came to live in this bedroom at Versailles in what was an unpopular, politically arranged marriage to Louis XVI. She never gained the favor of the French people, though she did her best to impress the court. Marie also had a penchant for rustic living, or at least a royal version of it. To indulge her taste for the countryside, a charming false village was erected with its own little mill and carefully antiqued cottages, cracked walls and all. It was in this idyllic setting, on October 5th, 1789, that Marie was alerted to startling news. The French Revolution had come to Versailles. Angry Parisians were descending upon the palace. The royal family left the next morning and would never return. And Versailles, which only 6 years before had witnessed the signing of the treaty that gave America its independence, now became a hated symbol of tyranny in its own land. "80 years later, the American author Mark Twain visited Versailles. Even this most democratic of tourists marveled at what he saw.
I used to abuse Louis XIV for spending $200 million when bread was so scarce, but I have forgiven him now. It is wonderfully beautiful to gaze and stare and try to understand that it is real, that it is on the earth, that it is not the Garden of Eden. And you half believe that you are the dupe of an exquisite dream.
All during the trip, they were talking about, we are going to meet a beautiful lady with a lamp. Like, I couldn't visualize it.
When I saw it, I said, Mother, Mother, come here, come here. This is the liberty. That torch up there, it says welcome.
Finally, we came to the promised land, you know, to the Statue of Liberty. Beautiful, beautiful woman.
I said to Mother, what does she mean? Mother just hugged me and said, that means America.
She rises out of the waters of New York Harbor, a modern-day colossus of metal, the largest ever forged. To this day, the most enduring symbol of America's best hopes for itself. But like the millions of new Americans who have passed beneath her, the story of the Statue of Liberty began across the sea in a troubled land. The year was 1865. In Paris, the harsh and war-torn rule of Emperor Napoleon III had turned the democratic dream of the French Revolution into a dim memory. To some French liberals, America was the true torchbearer of France's lost democratic ideals. They longed for the fraternity that once linked Washington and Lafayette. Among them was a sculptor, Frédéric Bartholdi, who set about designing a monumental gift to the young nation.
I will try to glorify the Republic and liberty over there, in the hope that someday I will find it here again.
He wanted his gift to be the first thing visitors saw when entering the New World, so he chose Bedloe's Island as a suitable site. If Americans would pay for a pedestal, he assured himself that France would finance a massive statue. Bartholdi tended to think big. His earlier works were bombastic and patriotic, but they shrank next to his new project, which would take him 15 years. He dubbed it Liberty Enlightening the World. Casting the statue was Bartholdi's greatest accomplishment. In France, he started making terracotta and bronze models in increasing sizes. Wooden frames were built to match, and then plaster was laid on top. In his Paris workshop, metalsmiths carefully hammered huge plates of Norwegian copper, each as thick as a $50, to conform to the plaster mold. Every feature of the statue, from her coiffure to the folds of her dress, was hand-hammered into place. The original color, a dark brown like an old penny, would gradually weather into a soft gray-green patina in the salt air of the Atlantic. The massive statue would also need to withstand winds whipping up to 125 miles per hour without toppling into the sea. Bartholdi turned to France's most brilliant structural engineer, Gustave Eiffel, to design an ingenious support system of 1,800 braces, including a main skeleton and an outer series of struts that would allow the copper plates to expand and contract with the weather without cracking. Eiffel's support scaffold itself was the tallest iron structure of its day, pushing the gargantuan lady above the rooftops of Paris for all to see. But while Paris gawked, America balked. Contributions were slow, well short of the $250,000 needed for the pedestal. Bartholdi took the giant torch on fundraising tours of the United States, where visitors were invited to climb aboard. Eventually, the newspaper publisher, Joseph Pulitzer, harangued the citizens of New York into supporting the pedestal. Itself a masterpiece of understatement, it was designed by Richard Morris Hunt to harmonize with the statue rather than compete with it, while bearing the weight of more than 225 tons of iron and copper. By 1885, France had contributed more than $400,000 to the project, and Bartholdi had worked 14 years. The completed statue was disassembled and sent off to its new home packed in more than 200 crates, 39 just for rivets. When the statue had been reassembled a year later in New York, Americans saw for the first time what would become a symbol of hope for a wave of newcomers in the decades to come. The finished statue was 15 stories high, with an index finger alone stretching 8 feet. Liberty's symbolism is clear. A tablet inscribed July 4th, 1776. Below her feet are the broken shackles of enslavement. Her crown of 7 points reaches out to the 7 continents and to the 7 seas, and she holds aloft the beacon of liberty to the world. Bartholdi actually wanted it to be lit from within, and in the 20th century, a weak electric light filtered through holes punched in the torch. The original now stands safely in a nearby museum. Recent refurbishing added a new torch with 24-karat gold leaf to enhance the illusion of illumination. Those who passed under the shadow of the torch came in search of a better living, in flight from an army, to join a relative, to flee a persecutor. They came with rumors of gold in the streets. They came with rags. Ironically, their first hours in the land of freedom were usually spent confined on Ellis Island. Immigrants named it the Island of Tears. Here, in the shadow of the Statue of Liberty, some 16 million hopeful souls poured into the Great Hall to await their fate. Some of them, deemed to be unfit, sick, or who just looked somehow mentally deficient, were turned back from the threshold of America and returned in the ships on which they had come. But most of them were admitted into the new land, sometimes with new names, always with renewed hope. As ferries took them into the metropolis of New York, they left behind the Colossus with the torch. The poet, Emma Lazarus, daughter of Russian Jewish immigrants, gave to the statue a purpose that Bartholdi hadn't imagined. Her words are now emblazoned on liberty's doorstep.
Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed, to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door.
While Americans hailed their newly imported marvel, back in Paris, the French were building one they'd keep for themselves. The same engineer who had built the framework for the Statue of Liberty had been given the commission of his career. Gustave Eiffel, bridge builder and structural engineer, was to create a monument for the centennial of the French Revolution. Eiffel knew both his history and his metallurgy. Cast iron would allow him to build a monumental structure with an impact worthy of the Revolution. He planned a tower of dizzying height, nearly 1,000 feet of iron latticework. It would remain the tallest structure in the world for 40 years. Eiffel used new technologies of prefabrication to forge 12,000 girders. They were manufactured off-site and assembled in place on the left bank of the Seine. 2.5 million rivets held up the iron latticework, which allowed the winds to pass through freely. More dangerous were the stings of critics who practically brought the project to a standstill. A prominent group of artists and intellectuals, including the writer Guy de Maupassant and the composer Charles Gounod, signed a published letter decrying the monstrosity arising over their beloved Paris.
The useless and monstrous Eiffel Tower is like a gigantic black factory chimney.
Crushing with its barbarous mass, Notre Dame.
Le Louvre, l'Arc de Triomphe.
All our monuments humiliated under this black blot.
Unfazed, Eiffel pressed on. The tower was completed on schedule in just over 600 working days and dedicated on March 31st, 1889. More than 2 million curious Parisians flocked to the tower that first year, scratching their names on the beams and buying souvenirs. They took midday meals in the platform restaurant and rode the ingenious elevators that scuttled along curving metalwork to reveal what they had never seen before. One visitor was Edmond de Goncourt.
Going up in the lift, I had a feeling in the pit of my stomach, as if I were on a ship at sea, but no dizziness. Up there, we were afforded a realization beyond anything imaginable on ground level. Of the greatness, the extent, the Babylonian immensity of Paris.
The tower changed the way Parisians saw the world around them. No longer merely a city of streets and boulevards, Paris now had a startling new vista of sky and horizon, patterns of color and patches of light. And the artists of Paris took in the view with new eyes. The city's painters, already revolutionizing the art world, now had a landmark worthy of their modern vision. In a way, Eiffel had forged in steel what artists were creating with oils. Georges Seurat took the most basic elements of painting, light and color, and by applying them precisely, produced an overall impression of weightless, timeless beauty. So too, Eiffel sculpted with some of architecture's essential components. Girders and rivets were employed to create a structural design that, when seen from afar, seemed somehow to resolve in an airy, ageless silhouette. Later, a coating of orange paint was added, gradually fading to a pale yellow. to increase the impression that the tower was floating on the skyline. But even after its completion, there were critics. De Maupassant stood by his earlier condemnation. In fact, he claimed to enjoy dining in the tower because it was the only place in Paris where he didn't have to look at it. The tower was even scheduled for demolition in 1909. Only its newfound use as a radio tower preserved it. And when its height helped to intercept German army transmissions during World War I, the tower's permanence was guaranteed. Ironically, what once was a symbol of a revolution, of progress and mass production, today seems rather quaint. A bit of old-world elegance in a frantic metropolis. But for its time, the tower represented a daring step. It thrust up its welcome to the modern age. It matched beauty with technology, asserting that the two could coexist. This claim alone may make La Tour Eiffel, the Eiffel Tower, the most optimistic wonder ever built. And perhaps the most poignant. In the heart of America, another man's daring dream came to life on the face of a granite mountain. In the Black Hills of South Dakota, among cliffs that stand as testimonies to the sheer power and permanence of the land, one man set out to put his mark on a mountain. Not just a personal expression of his own artistry, but a monument to the founding principles of a democratic nation. Mount Rushmore began as the somewhat provincial dream of a little-known South Dakota historian named Doane Robinson. He imagined a Wild West theme carved somewhere in the sheer pinnacles of the Black Hills. But the artist he commissioned had a different vision altogether. Gutzon Borglum was the American-born son of Danish immigrants, an accomplished painter and sculptor who had studied with Auguste Rodin and had forged massive sculptures of historical figures such as Abraham Lincoln and Robert E. Lee. On this massive canvas, Borglum envisioned more than a tribute to the Wild West. He instead wanted to capture the enduring qualities of an entire democracy.
I want something in America. A few feet of stone that bears witness to the great things we accomplished as a nation.
Borglum reached deep into the American psyche to find the archetypes of national ideals. George Washington, who for Borglum was the very embodiment of democratic leadership, a reluctant hero of the Revolution, and the man who gave dignity to the cause of American freedom. Thomas Jefferson, philosopher-statesman, author of the Declaration of Independence, and profound defender of individual freedoms. Abraham Lincoln, who symbolized the strength of the American Union and the right of all citizens to be free. And Teddy Roosevelt, personifying the robust expansion of the nation with the commitment to preserve its natural resources and to promote entrepreneurial freedom. But how to shape a mountain into these four faces? First, Borglum and Robinson found a site with the right combination of surface expanse, structural integrity, and year-round sunlight. Borglum's work began in 1927 and would continue sporadically for 14 years, would involve more than 300 workers, and eventually would cost nearly $1 million. More than 450,000 tons of granite were blasted away to create the faces, which stretch 60 feet high. The mountain proved an unwieldy canvas. Unstable stone forced Borglum to dynamite his first draft, which depicted Washington and Jefferson in opposite places. Unfazed, Borglum started on a new Jefferson, avoiding dangerous fissures by tilting the head a little higher than the others. Beyond engineering, Borglum's success at Mount Rushmore was to achieve artistic beauty on such a vast scale. Borglum forged emotion out of rock. Here, a spike of granite in a hollowed-out pupil creates the glint of an eye. Borglum planned to carve all the figures to the waist, but died in 1941 before he could finish. His son, appropriately named Lincoln, completed the heads, but the outbreak of World War II put off any dedication ceremonies. Finally, 50 years after its completion, Mount Rushmore was officially dedicated in July 1991, putting the final seal on a monument that has come to symbolize the giant strivings of the human spirit. Gutzon Borglum.
We believe a nation's memorial should, like Washington, Jefferson, Lincoln, and Roosevelt, have a serenity, a nobility, a power carved high as close to heaven as we can to show posterity what manner of men they were. Then breathe a prayer that these records will endure until the wind and rain shall wear them away.
Borglum's creation seems like the last great vision of a bygone era, an age in which heroes were not only believed in, but had identifiable faces. An era when artists still took the entire human experience as their province and dared to make statements on a superhuman scale. And yet there is another great wonder of the world still in progress, even in our own impatient age. And it is happening only 17 miles from Borglum's masterpiece on Mount Rushmore. Here, a Polish-American orphan named Korczak Jułkowski began the most ambitious stone carving ever undertaken in the ancient or the modern world. A monument 60 stories high to the great Sioux Indian warrior, Crazy Horse. During the 1930s, as the stone faces of American presidents of European descent began to emerge from the South Dakota granite, Chief Standing Bear of the Sioux Nation was moved to ask Korczak a poignant question. Where were the monuments to his own people, to the heroes of a tribe who had populated the land for 400 centuries, but who had been all but annihilated in the space of 40 years? Korczak's answer was to devote the rest of his life to carving a modern-day colossus of Crazy Horse. The scale is almost incomprehensible. All 4 heads of Mount Rushmore would fit into the head of Crazy Horse alone. Korczak saw in this legendary warrior the heroic dignity of a defeated people. He set about his task with a perseverance worthy of his other hero and mentor, Gutzon Borglum. Eccentric and visionary, Korczak plowed thousands of his own dollars into the mining rights for this mountain. And in 1947, with less than $200 to his name, he began his Herculean task.
I am a storyteller in stone, but that's all I am. I wanted to tell the world that there was once a race of people that lived here that were remarkable. I didn't intend to make it this large, you know. I intended to make something 100 feet high. Gee, the 100-foot figure would look like nothing. And I said, I'll carve the whole mountain.
After 4 decades, some 8 million tons of rock have been blasted from the mountain. Korczak knew he would not live to see his work completed. When he died in 1982, he left complete plans for continuing the work on the monument, now being carried on by his widow Ruth and most of their 10 children.
I guess he taught them that there's no limit to what you can do, and whatever you want to do, if you believe it strongly enough and work hard enough and you're willing to pay the price, you can do anything you want to. You can be anything you want in this world.
Korczak summed up his own philosophy by quoting an old saying he had once heard.
When the legends die, the dreams end. And when the dreams end, there is no more greatness.
Crazy Horse waits for the next dreamer. In its shadows, a listener might hear the story of all human creations, as timeless as the wind off the mountains. A whisper of ancient heroes, the muse of ancient builders. It is a call to great vision and great striving, a call to leave a mark, to create a new wonder. Next, your video bonus. The Eagle has landed.
The following promotional message appears in consideration for services rendered during production of this video.
If you're looking for an airline that flies to the great wonders of the world, you could say we have it covered. Because Lufthansa flies to 180 cities in 82 countries around the world. Lufthansa. Worldwide and worldwise.
Engine arm off. 13 is in.
We copy you down, Eagle.
Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
And we're getting a picture on the TV. There's a great deal of contrast in it, and currently it's upside down on our monitor, but we can make out a fair amount of detail. Okay, Neil, we can see you coming down the ladder now.
Sunday, July 20th, 1969. Around the world, nearly 1 billion people watched this moment on television as the first man from Earth prepared to set foot upon the moon.
At the foot of the ladder, the LEM footbeds are only depressed in the surface about 1 or 2 inches, although the surface appears to be very, very fine-grained as you get close to it. It's almost like a powder. Ground mass is very fine. I'm going to step off the LEM now. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
All that we have accomplished in space, all that we may accomplish in days and years to come, we stand ready to share for the benefit of all mankind.
As we explore the reaches of space, let us go to the new worlds together, not as new worlds to be conquered, but as a new adventure to be shared.
Since the earliest time, man has imagined this moment, the moment when his fellow man would make the first journey to the moon. Now the time had come. In the 6th decade of the 20th century, the ancient dream was to become a reality. The flight of Apollo 11 was the culmination of many years of planning, working, building, and testing. Thousands of people had contributed toward this day of accomplishment. The great Saturn V rocket and the complex Apollo spacecraft had been assembled together and moved to the launch pad. The equipment and techniques and personnel had been proved in earlier missions, and now they were ready. The astronauts chosen for this mission had flown it many times in ground-based simulators. They had all been in space before. They had trained carefully and well, and now they too were ready. Astronaut Michael Collins would pilot the Apollo Command Module. Astronaut Edwin Aldrin Jr. would pilot the Lunar Module. And astronaut Neil Armstrong would serve as mission commander. Armstrong would be the first man to step upon the moon. July 16th, the day had come. The moon awaited. The men rose early, ate breakfast, and dressed in their spacesuits. Other astronauts had made this journey to the launch pad, but never with such anticipation. 9:32 a.m., July 16th. 3 hours later, the Apollo command module moves forward to extract the lunar module from the third stage of the launch vehicle. Both are moving at more than 17,000 miles an hour. Docked together, they will sail 250,000 miles across the sea of space and into orbit around the Earth's nearest neighbor.
Oh, loud and clear now, Mike, and we understand that you are docked.
During the 3-day journey to the moon, the astronauts kept busy. Checklists, navigation and observation, housekeeping. They must work in a weightless environment, keeping their spacecraft and themselves in good condition. Data must be collected and reported. Experiments must be performed, including photography both inside and outside the spacecraft. Because of the film speed, these actions appear faster than they actually were. July 19th. Apollo 11 slows down and goes into orbit around the moon. The bright blue planet of Earth now lies 238,000 miles beyond the lunar horizon. Astronauts Armstrong and Aldrin, now in the lunar module, separate from the command module. Astronaut Collins remains behind. Preparation for the lunar module descent to the moon now begins. The command module assumes the new name, Columbia. The lunar module will be called the Eagle. From Columbia, Michael Collins' camera sees bright rays of the sun reflecting patterns of color from the surface of the Eagle. In this strange metallic bird rides the ancient and endless dream of all mankind. The command pilot can see detail which his camera cannot record. The 4 landing pads of the lunar module are fully extended and locked in place. The Eagle is poised and prepared for its descent to the lunar surface. The moon landing craft rocket engine fires to slow it down and to place it on the pathway to the landing site in the Sea of Tranquility. There is tension and caution as the Eagle flies lower. Warning lights blink on as the computer tries to keep up with the demand for control data, but the status remains go.
Eagle, we got you now. It's looking good, over. Roger, copy. Eagle Houston, after yaw around angles, S-band pitch, -9er, yaw, +18. Roger, you're a go to continue power descent. You're a go to continue power descent.
Altitude now 21,000 feet, still looking very good. Velocity down now to 1,200 feet per second.
You're looking great to us, Eagle. Give us a reading on the 1202 program alarm. Roger, we got you. We're going at alarm.
Good radar data. We're now in the approach phase, everything looking good. Altitude 4,200.
Houston, you're a go for landing, over. Roger, understand. Go for landing. 3,000 feet. Copy. Alarm.
Altitude 1,600. 1,400 feet, still looking very good.
700 feet, 21 down. 33 degrees. 100 feet, down at 19. 1201. 1201. Roger, 1201 alarm. We're go, same type, we're go.
Altitude, velocity, light. 3.5 down, 220 feet. 13 forward. 11 forward, coming down nicely, 200 feet. 4.5 down, 5.5 down.
60 seconds.
Lights on. 6. Down 2.5. Forward. Forward. Good. 40 feet down 2.5. Picking up some dust. 4 forward. 4 forward. Drifting to the right a little. Good. Okay. Contact light. Okay, engine stop.
We copy you down, Eagle.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Through the window of the Eagle, Armstrong and Aldrin see what no human eyes have ever seen before. Their spacecraft casts a long shadow across the undisturbed dust of centuries. Seven hours after landing, after careful preparations for later ascent were completed, Armstrong opens the Eagle hatch and begins his climb down to the surface. The first footsteps on this strange new world must be taken cautiously. The moon has only 1/6 the gravity of Earth. The nature of its surface was still unknown.
I'm going to step off the limb now. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Once on the surface, Armstrong scoops up a small sample of lunar dust and rock, precaution against the possibility of an emergency takeoff. According to plan, astronaut Aldrin now descends from the Eagle. He and his equipment would weigh 383 pounds on Earth. Here, they weigh about 66 pounds. For a brief moment, the first men on the moon stand and look at the stark, lonely landscape around them, an experience which no one before them can share. But there is much to be done in the limited time which they can stay on this airless, cloudless satellite of Earth. This sheet of metal foil traps and holds particles from the sun, the so-called solar wind, or barrage of solar energy, which constantly strikes the moon's surface. Results of this experiment will be taken back to Earth to reveal new secrets to anxious scientists. An American flag is left behind on the moon, together with medals honoring American and Soviet spacemen who lost their lives in earlier space tests, and a small disc carrying messages of goodwill from 73 nations on Earth. A plaque on the lunar module reads, Here, men from the planet Earth first set foot upon the moon, July 1969 AD. We came in peace for all mankind. Through a specially made television camera, viewers in many nations on Earth were able to watch the astronauts as they walked and worked on the moon. Despite the bulky spacesuits and the backpacks containing oxygen, temperature control, and communications equipment, the Apollo 11 crew found they could move easily about the surface. Because there is no wind or rain on the moon, these footprints will remain for centuries. In addition to collecting rock and soil samples, the explorers leave behind a seismometer. This highly sensitive device would send back valuable information on external meteoroid impacts, as well as internal lunar movements. A 100 prism laser reflector would help man to measure the exact distance from Earth to Moon to an accuracy of 6 inches. These were the first of many experiments which will be taken to the Moon to provide man continuing and increasing knowledge about the Moon and the vastness of space beyond. After 2 hours and 31 minutes, the first lunar explorers had completed their research on the Moon. A night of rest in the lunar module, countdown preparations, and they were ready to come home.
Tranquility Base, Houston. Guidance recommendation is pings, and you're cleared for takeoff. Roger, understand. We're number 1 on the runway. 7, 6, 5, port stage, engine arm ascent. Shadow, beautiful. Very smooth. Very quiet ride. There's that one crater on there.
Thousand feet high, 80 feet per second vertical rise.
Eagle Houston, you're looking good at 2. Ping, zags, and midspin all agree. I'm going right down US 1. Eagle Houston, going right down the track. Everything's great.
Horizontal velocity approaching 2,500 feet per second.
Roger.
Some 120 miles to go until insertion.
July 21st. The Eagle and its 2-man crew lifted off the Moon perfectly and climbed slowly to rendezvous and dock with the mothership, Columbia. While Armstrong and Aldrin explored the Moon, astronaut Collins had kept a long and lonely vigil in the Columbia. The approaching Eagle was a welcome sight. Later, the 3 men would share their reflections on this adventure with the world.
I believe that from the early space flights, we demonstrated a potential to carry out this type of a mission. And again, it was a question of time until this would be accomplished.
I think it's a technical triumph for this country to have said what it was going to do a number of years ago, and then, by golly, do it.
The relative ease with which we were able to carry out our mission, which, of course, came after a very efficient and a logical sequence of flights, I think that this demonstrated that we were certainly on the right track when we took this commitment to go to the moon.
I just see it as a beginning of a new age.
Once again, the bright blue planet of Earth rises over the lunar horizon. For those who had witnessed man's landing in the Sea of Tranquility, the moon would never again appear quite the same. July 24th, dawn in the Pacific. Apollo blazes across the heavens, coming back to Earth at 25,000 miles an hour. President Richard Nixon, who had talked with the astronauts by telephone while they were on the moon, was waiting aboard the recovery carrier to welcome the returning voyagers. The president later expressed the nation's response to this historic mission.
Some way, when those two Americans stepped on the moon, the people of this world were brought closer together. That it is that spirit, the spirit of Apollo, that America can now help to bring to our relations with other nations. The spirit of Apollo transcends geographical barriers and political differences. It can bring the people of the world together in peace.
To protect against any possible lunar contamination, the astronauts put on airtight special garments before coming aboard the rescue ship. They transferred directly from the helicopter to a mobile quarantine van, in which they would be flown back to the Manned Spacecraft Center in Houston, Texas. July 27th. The journey was ended. They were home again. lay 3 weeks of isolation, medical tests, and mission debriefings. Then visits to major cities of America and abroad. The details of their unique mission would be relived and remembered so that others might learn what they had learned, and that future travelers in space might build upon their experience. The rock and soil samples brought back would be examined and analyzed by scientists in many lands. They would reveal new insights into the origin and the age and the composition of the moon, and perhaps new knowledge of the Earth as well. Already experiments left on the moon were sending back revealing new information. The mission was successfully completed. The Eagle had landed the first men on the moon, and Columbia had returned them safely to Earth. Wherever man journeys tomorrow across the ocean of our universe, history will remind him that Apollo 11 was mankind's first encounter with a new world.